So tonight we're going to talk about emotions and perception. And I said that the discussion board on the Van Maenen's Smile Factory is due. So, and then I also had a discussion board. I had the wrong discussion board on there, and I changed it to emotions, moods, and interpersonal skills. So, that though, if you attend the Zoom lecture, you don't need to do. So, but you do need to do the Smile Factory. People are waiting to get in. Okay. I don't see anyone waiting. I don't see anyone waiting at this point. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about emotion. So basically, affect has to do with the broad range of feelings, and emotions are more intense feelings, whereas moods are broader. And basically, emotions are very important in any activity. Affect can be positive or negative. I'm admitting a couple of people now. Emotions can be positive or negative. Positive affect includes positive emotions, and there are many kinds of emotions. Among the more important ones are what might be called moral emotions, and I think part of the issue, both with emotions and perception, which is why I kind of put them together, is that emotions can be viewed, morals can be viewed as emotions. That was the argument of Hume, and I think also Aristotle, if you parse a little bit his idea that emotions are balancing, and that you balance the extremes, that basically what he's saying is that you need to moderate your emotions. And Hume, though, very importantly, made the argument that you can't really say morals are true or false, that they're not rational, that you can find a lot. Morals are often self-contradictory, they have no logic, and rather that morals are primarily emotional. So basically, to understand morals to a degree in this view, you need to understand emotions. Different cultures have different takes on emotions. Some are more accepting of, say, negative emotions. Other cultures are not. According to your book, Eastern European cultures are more accepting of negative emotions than are Latin American cultures. But I'll take their word for it. Positive emotions are good for the workplace. Companies want to have employees who are positive thinking, have good attitudes, a lot of positive job engagement. And many organizations don't like open expression of emotion as well. So when you work in especially one of these big companies, is corporate America, very often excessive emotional display is not viewed favorably. And as a result, you have to be able to regulate your emotions. This is also related, incidentally. I was talking in my 3200 class about communication today, and it's also related to communication because communication is steeped in emotion. Anytime you communicate, you're engaging in emotion. So if you want to improve your communication skills, you have to improve your emotional intelligence as well. They're very, very closely related. communication, and I'd say all of interpersonal skills are based on both communication and emotion. So it's a practical subject, but of course your book is very theoretical and doesn't treat it in such a practical way. But if you think about it, if you are able, like a yogi in yoga, you're able to control your emotions. Like there are these guys who can like walk on nails and all this kind of thing. If you're able to, control your emotion in that way, you're obviously going to be much more successful in life. So like getting control of your emotions is a big part of it. And that's where the idea of emotional labor comes in. And really the Van Manen case is based on this concept of emotional labor, that an employee's emotions are part of their work, and the company desires certain emotions during interpersonal transactions. And a lot of what is expected of the characters in Disneyland, is that they display certain emotional emotional tones, and that is so even if they're under stress, or they're the customers abuse them or whatever. But of course there's always subtlety, and they have ways of expressing hostility, but they're always under the undercover kind of. So basically this idea of emotional labor is extremely important. And I think part of the reason we're not going to see AI overtaking human activity in the way that a lot of people fear is that I don't think AI is anywhere near, or even within many generations, of being able to express emotion and to understand emotion the way we can. So basically, our ability to learn how to regulate our emotions and use emotion in the workplace is an important part of work in our time. And I think part of the reason is that technology can do a lot of the stuff that, the clerical stuff that used to be done by large offices of, clerical employees. Now, well, that's done by computers, but what we have is the emotional component. And people who are able to do that have a competitive advantage. So a lot of things will affect emotions. So basically, while we can manage them and through emotional labor, let's say, there are things like your personality, and the personality trait. We talked about neuroticism and the big 5 personality traits. That these will, if you have a high neuroticism, it's going to, by definition, you're going to be more emotional. Things like the time of day, the stress you're under, the day of the week, depending on the culture, recent social interactions you've had, whether you've slept well, and which is a reason why you need to think about the importance of sleeping, fatigue, whether you've had exercise. I know I am completely different if I have a workout at the gym versus if I don't have a workout at the gym. Totally different emotional state. So basically, all of these things affect emotion. Now, many years ago, a guy named Irving Goffman, Irving with an E, Irving Goffman, wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And what he basically says in that book is that we're all acting all the time. And basically, this is especially true of people at work, that we all are playing a role. Here, I'll show you his picture. I just called it up on the web. here we go. So this is Irving Guffman. And basically, it's a really cool book. It's really interesting. You know, a lot of insights that we take for granted now are in there, you know, and basically what he says is we're all actors on the stage, sort of like Shakespeare said, you know, all the world's a stage. And basically the way we do that is what your book calls surface acting. That we hide feelings and forego emotional displays in response to rules. So in other words, the culture of the organization, the pattern of behavior drives our our willingness or our openness about expressing our emotions, and we adjust. Now, of course, this can be very stressful at times. We don't always have the culture that existed in ancient times when people assumed certain facts and behaved in certain ways in response to those facts. But instead we have to pretend. We have to make more of an effort to pretend. The difference between surface acting and deep acting is that in deep acting, we actually try to modify our true feelings and change our feelings. And you can see that it's not that we try to, it's that we adopt. We often will adopt. And part of this is just due to cognitive dissonance. That if we repeat something over and over again, we start to believe it. It becomes too hard to not believe it ourselves. And so we ultimately start to believe the things we say over and over again. This is why culture plays such a strong role in shaping people's feelings. I was just doing some reading on totalitarianism, and I read part of a book by Ludwig von Mises called Omnipotent Government. And basically he says in there that, you know, and he lived in the early period of Nazism. He left Austria a few years before things got really bad, but he says that he didn't blame the German people for believing this stuff because it's in the media lies, the newspapers lie, everywhere you look, the education system lies. So it's all concerted, and you get the same message in a way. So these claims become science. One of the things that not only von Mises doesn't talk about this, but it's in Hannah Arendt's classic, The Origins of Totalitarianism, and it's also in a more recent book by a guy named Desmet, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, that totalitarianism has, all through the 20th century, the forms of totalitarianism that became the most horrific were the ones that most vocally claimed that they were scientific. And this goes for both Marxism, Nazism, as well as fascism, that they claim to reflect science. And so it was a fact. And these facts are broadcast everywhere and then adopted by the public. And von Mises said, you know, it was not the people's fault, that the system created this mindset in the people. So basically, you know, and companies are not unlike totalitarian systems, really. There's a lot of cross-fertilization there. In other words, the companies control how you think, how you speak, and influence you. So, you know, if you work for corporate America, it's not that unlike being in communist China or something. They're not that different. So basically, there are display rules, and people have to work to show that they are expressing themselves in accordance with the display rules. So basically, studies of display rules in corporations find that when the display rules are high or low in intensity, They don't perform as well as when the display rules are only moderate. And they have a high degree of discretion concerning emotional display. So there needs to be some coordination and some sense of unity that, and not everything can be said openly, but there should be a lot of, if there's a fair amount of openness and a fair amount of freedom, that's optimal. You don't want too much self-indulgence, and you don't want too much control. And that's where I think what you see in the Disney case is that there's a lot of control. And but for them it works. I'm not being at all critical of Disney. It's a company that until recently has been extraordinarily successful, and the theme parks are certainly part of that. So basically, emotional dissonance is where your emotions are inconsistent with the emotions you're required to express. And this can be extremely tiring, that you can be exhausted emotionally by this. I think if you look at people who work in fields where there's a great deal of caring required, things like healthcare, for example, these jobs are very, very draining emotionally and can be very exhausting. Emotional intelligence. EI is the ability to detect and manage emotional cues and information. So you need to be able to understand people's emotions, and you need to be able to react to them and manage them. 59% of managers said they would not hire someone with high mental ability but low emotional intelligence. That may be true. I would say it's probably very true. I have a friend who was fired from his job. He's a brilliant academic, but he just alienated people, and they ended up going after him. You need that emotional intelligence, unless, even if you're, Nikola Tesla. If you study the biography of Nikola Tesla, he really ended up a failure financially. I mean, you can't doubt that he was a great success. I'll send you a link to Fiorello Mayor LaGuardia's eulogy of Tesla when he died at the Hotel New Yorker during the World War II. And LaGuardia, says he was one of the most useful men who ever lived. And it's true. And, we can remember him as the one who made widespread electricity transmission possible, basically invented the radio and television and lots of other things, x-rays, things that he didn't get credit for, that other people got credit for. He actually was the inventor of particularly radio. But basically, he was a failure financially, and it was totally due to his lack of self-control emotionally. I'm not blaming him. He had mental problems and other things, but basically, if you want to succeed, even if you're Tesla, you can't succeed. What my point is just that even if you're the greatest genius who ever lived, you can't succeed without good emotional intelligence. So basically, studies find that emotional intelligence predicts job attitudes, it predicts performance, it's related to improving teamwork. People with good emotional intelligence tend to be happier, they tend to be more popular. But of course, it's very, very difficult to measure EI, especially if you're trying to measure it for purposes of employment. People can fake it. And that's why I would say early, when we were first going for accreditation at this business school, we were accredited, as you know, which is a major triumph. We're a top school because of that. And when we were first going for accreditation, maybe 10, 15 years ago, somebody suggested that we integrate ethics by giving the students ethics tests. And I said, it's ridiculous. You can't give people ethics tests. this was done by Kohlberg. The idea of the Kohlberg maturity scale is that Lawrence Kohlberg was a psychologist at Harvard, and he took the ideas of Piaget, the developmental psychologist, who said that people mature in stages, and he applied this developmental psychology, and the different ages you're able to learn different things, and he applied it to morality, and he claimed that at the base level, an infant basically is a psychopath. They well, maybe even worse than that. They have no morals at all. That they need to be shaped, and the parent shapes the morality, and gradually they adopt a morality, that goes beyond fear of punishment, where they start making little deals with their friends, so that they say, well, if we both steal an apple from the grocery store, we'll split it equally, or something like that. So they don't really have ethics about a lot of things, but they sort of start to have like ethics where they share, they make a deal with each other, and they have a contract with each other, and that then sort of matures into a conformity, but conformity to your peer group rather than to society at large. And then when people grow up, they say they don't care about their peer group so much, but they care about society at large, and they conform to the laws and morals of society. So that would be like a mature person, according to Kohlberg. And then he goes a little further and he says, but there are certain people who go beyond the average adult, and these would be people like Socrates, the Greek philosopher, who said that he would rather die than violate the laws of Athens, because by living in Athens, he basically made an agreement, and he by living in Athens, he agreed to live by the law of Athens. And if an Athenian jury convicts him of murder, not of murder, he's convicted not of murder, it was of corrupting the youth of Athens. He was convicted of speech crimes, political incorrectness, if you will. And he said that if the law of Athens unfairly convicts me, I'm not entitled to question that, because by living in Athens, I agreed to live up to the laws of Athens. And so in the Platonic dialogue, the Credo, his students try to rescue him and send him off to a foreign colony, and he refuses and instead accepts his fate to be executed. So basically that to Kohlberg is sort of like you're living by agreement, you're living by a higher standard than just the laws of society, that even if the laws seem to violate your moral code, that you abide by the standard that you've freely chosen to accept. And then the highest level, according to him, is like a take on Kant, where he says that your every action, you see your every action as a universal law. That's what Kant said. And so basically, I go ahead, Joshua.
So I read in the book that high levels of emotional connection that towards ethics was the way that ethics was brought out into the world, and then I realized that ethics shapes the code of law. So I would think more that the code of law is shaped by thoughts and reasoning, understanding, fairness, equality. So my question is that if ethics is emotional, then how should we teach ourselves? I mean, is it more of a personal bias that makes us incorrect, of a subjectivity type of deal, or?
Well, I don't know that we can say with finality that ethics is emotional. I mean, I'm saying this is what Hume said. Okay, so basically other people have different takes on it. Religion sees ethics as derived from divine law. Okay, so basically, if you look at the three Western religions, they all took Aristotle and grounded Aristotle in revealed religion, and said that the way that you have to understand Aristotle is based on God's law. Okay, so that's a totally different take on it than Hume. That, of course, you can say, well, the Enlightenment questions that, and these are huge questions that we can't debate today. Other people argue that ethics is primarily emotional but particularistic. And so, although we have certain virtues, this is more the Aristotelian take, that ethics is not derived from law, but rather ethics involves the balancing of various laws or virtues. And
Can you kind of compromise in understanding that we have a conscience, that we know the right thing to do deep inside, and that's derived from our emotional connection with the world?
yeah, that would sort of be close to what a lot of people might say. I'm not going to say it's Aristotle, but it's certainly, I would say it's close to Kant. It's what you just said is kind of about, it's in between, kind of, which is good. That was very good, actually. And so we're not going to define things with finality. For example, in some eras, the idea of diversity is very alien. In our era, it's ideal. So basically, who's right? Are we right? Are they right? There's really no way to resolve such debates with finality. That's why liberalism, the idea that you're accepting of a wide range of views that can live together and people respect each other despite their differences, that the most important virtue is tolerance and open-mindedness, that this leads to a more successful society in today's world than ones that focus on, well, we feel this way, so we need a tightly controlled society based on some set of moral values that we've decided on. Okay, so I guess to answer your question, I don't think there's any one right answer. Does that help?
I mean, the question would only be, impactful based on whether there's a conflict between emotions and thought processes. I mean, if you would think that our thoughts conflict with the way we feel, then it's a problem.
Oh, yeah. If so, you're painting a picture of a world where we know something is not true emotionally, and yet we adopt a certain viewpoint because, I guess, why would you think it if you don't believe it? Because we're coerced into it or something?
I mean, emotions could be irrational, and people believe, in the corporate world, I read in the book that if we speak with our emotions expressed through every word, then they're going to look at us as if we're basing our rationality on our emotions, that we feel too much of it. So it's better to have that emotional dissonance at an advantage to keep ourselves from appearing, vulnerable or emotionally irrational.
Yeah. Okay, so that's like emotional labor. That's basically a survival skill in corporate America you're talking about. Yes?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Very good. Very interesting discussion. Basically, this idea of emotional regulation that Josh is kind of alluding to is that we have to identify and modify our emotions, and basically our ability to regulate our emotions can predict. In other words, if we're good at emotional regulation, or in many jobs, we're going to be good at the job. So being able to control our emotions for many types of jobs is an important trait. And basically, people with high neuroticism, high emotional instability, are going to have trouble with that. They're going to have trouble regulating their emotions, and there are some jobs they won't be able to do. Diversity, the subject of the course, in part, leads to more emotional regulation. So people who are conscious of diversity become better at regulating their emotion. It's a form of emotional labor, really. People who are able to regulate their emotions are better at job search. Now, of course, the regulation of emotions, as I said just before, is tiring. It can have reverse effects because you may focus on the emotion. I think also there can be like a kind of inversion, like a backlash when things get too bottled up. If you suppress your emotion, then that's going to be ineffective. However, what a lot of people will do is reappraise their thinking. So basically, if you're in a situation where you have to keep your emotion at bay because you don't really feel that you believe what you're saying, you're ultimately going to change what you think. Okay, and that's kind of cognitive dissonance. Open expression of emotions can help to regulate them, but you have to be careful who you're talking to. Okay, so I would say never divulge, when you're in a work situation, never divulge your true feelings to anyone at work. I once worked with a guy who was became the head of labor relations at Johnson & Johnson. He was a real maniac, this guy. And we had some great conversations. And he said to me one time that when he was working with a union, what he would often do is tell people who weren't like people he was actually dealing with, but people he knew the people he was dealing with, he would talk to them and he'd like pretend to confide in them and tell them what great people, the people he was negotiating with, were, how brilliant they were, and he never saw such talented people. Like, he would say stuff, and he said if he did it the right way, so it seemed like he wasn't being manipulative but was just talking about his true feelings, that it would always get back to them, of course. And so it was a way they'd be nicer to him in the negotiation because he had said these complimentary things about them. And he did this all the time, he told me. So basically, the people who do these kinds of things for a living learn the tactics of doing things like that. Okay, so basically, moving on, one other statistic I got from your book: Air Force personnel who scored high on an EI test, emotional intelligence test, were 2.6 times more successful than other Air Force personnel. So in other words, if you can get a test that's somewhat accurate, it's going to reveal that people with high EI are more successful. The trouble is you can't give that kind of test when you're going to employ people, because too many people understand how to game such a test. Okay, so moving into perception, and basically next time we'll do Rashomon, the great classic movie by Akira Kurosawa, about a murder that's witnessed by 4 different people. and each one has a different version of the murder. It's considered one of the great movies ever made, and it was probably, I think it was Kurosawa's first movie, and it's among the few great, there were many great Japanese movies, but the few greatest Japanese movies. And it's considered one of the top 50 movies of all time by many people. And so basically, the term, the Rashomon effect, has come to mean that when you're in a company, let's say, and something happens, everybody perceives what happened in a way that's flattering to themselves. Part of its self-serving bias and justification. So people tend to justify what happens, what happens in terms of what makes them look good. And I think one of the messages of Rashomon is that we can never know what's real, what's really true. So everything is a matter of perception, ultimately. So perception is a process by which we organize sensory impressions to give meaning to our environment. We perceive things that might be different from objective reality. And the simple truth is that what we perceive is not in the real world. This is again Kant, but it also Hume made this argument. But rather our minds structure the matter and energy around us in a uniform way. And science is basically not the study of the real world, but the study of how our perceptions organize the real world. So it's a combination. It's the interaction of our perceptions with the real world. This is like hard to get your mind around, but people who study quantum theory and all that sort of thing, they've arrived at, they themselves have arrived at this through physics theory. So basically, people's behavior and conclusions are based on their perception of what reality is, not on reality ourselves. And our perceptions are fairly regular, although people who suffer from what we call mental illness, and a really wonderful psychiatrist who died a few years ago named Thomas Zaz wrote a book, The Myth of Mental Illness. I'll put his name up there. And basically, Zaz argues in that book that there's no objective measure of what constitutes mental illness, that rather it's simply a matter, it's a value judgment, in effect. And I recommend the book. So basically, we perceive reality, and we perceive it usually in a systematic way, of course, except for people who are schizophrenic, say, then they perceive it in a different way. But basically, we can understand the world as how we systematically perceive it. Okay, so the perceiver has certain things that influence perceptions, and we will perceive things slightly differently. Attitudes, values, personalities, motives, interests, past experiences, prejudices, all contribute to our perception. And the relationship of a target to its background influences perception. So what that means, let me show you. It's easy to see that. So like,
excuse me, Professor, are you arguing that perception is deceptive?
no, perception is all we have. I'm not saying it's deceptive. It's the ultimate thing. In other words, what we have is the perception of the world. And to the extent that we can systematically understand it, we can derive general laws about the world.
All right.
So basically, if you have a thing where there's a lot of dots, it's hard for me. I'll just explain it. I won't bother with the illustration. If you have a thing with a lot of dots, but one dot is moving, the thing you'll notice is the moving dot. You won't notice the other dots. Okay, so what makes you notice something has to do with what the background is, what's moving, what's not moving, whether the appearance of something is pleasant. For example, your book quotes a statistic that people's looks predict loan approval with significant accuracy. Okay, so basically people who look good are more likely to get a loan from a bank. Okay, so basically attribution theory has to do with our perception and judgment about people's actions. And we have to determine at times whether people are doing things because they want to do them or because the situation forces them to do the things. Attribution theory distinguishes between external and internal attribution. And it claims that the three factors that determine whether we say something is due to an external cause, like the situation forces them into it, or something they've done something because they choose to, are called distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Distinctiveness is that an individual displays different behavior in different situations. So then if that occurs, then you'll say, well, the cause that they acted a certain way is due to the situation. So if there's a rising stock market and you buy stocks, but when there's a falling stock market, you don't buy stocks, people might conclude that the reason you bought stocks is the rising stock market. Okay, whereas if you buy stocks when the market's rising and you buy stocks when the market's falling, they might conclude that you buy stocks just because you want to buy stocks. Okay, so also, if everyone faces, the idea of consensus is that if everyone who faces a similar situation behaves similarly, then the cause will be viewed as external. So if you say, if a market's going up and a lot of people are buying stocks, then you say, well, the reason they're buying the stocks is the market's going up. Then if the market starts falling, they all sell, then you say, well, the reason they're selling is it's a panic. They're selling because the market's going down. So they're not buying and selling because of an internal cause in our perception, but rather because of an external cause. So in other words, the way we would look at that is that, and basically, I would say that that's probably a fair description of people buying and selling stocks. Okay, so the final thing is consistency. So if people behave the same way all the time, then we'll say that that's an internal cause rather than an external cause. Okay, so those three things, distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency, will determine whether we attribute motives to the situation or to somebody's internal will. Now, a related idea that's slightly different is the idea of fundamental attribution error. So we tend to underestimate the influences of external factors and overestimate the importance of internal factors in assessing people's behavior, and that's called fundamental attribution error. So everyone has this bias that if somebody does something, we tend to assume it's because they wanted to. We don't tend to assume that it's because they were forced into it by the situation. Okay, that's fundamental attribution error. We're all prone to that. Self-serving bias is the idea that people tend to attribute ambiguous information about themselves as positive and to reject negative feedback. So whereas if something goes wrong, fundamental attribution error will say it's because of the person. If we're looking at somebody else, we won't say it's because of the situation. But if something goes wrong to us because of self-serving bias, we'll say, oh, it's because of the situation. So basically, people tend to accept positive feedback and reject negative feedback about themselves. Now, we all make certain shortcuts in judging other people. One of these is selective perception. And we have selective perception in almost any aspect of our perceptual process. The idea of selective perception is that we only see certain things that stand out. Like if one dot's moving and the others aren't, we see the one that's moving. If we're in a room and the dominant color is white, we might only perceive white, but there might be other colors, we just don't perceive them because it's not the dominant color. Things that contrast, like if you're in a room with a lot of tall people and there's one short person, you'll notice the short person. We tend to stereotype, generalize from past experience. So all those bias our perceptions, and that's why interviewers often make perceptual judgments that are inaccurate. Often people who interview you will base their perception of you on the first second they see you. So the way you present yourself initially, in other words, the clothes you're wearing, the way you carry yourself, whether you look them in the eye, whether you're like someone that they like, all of these things are going to affect whether the interviewer likes you or not. So therefore, you want to use that. You want to try to manage that. People attempt to validate their perceptions of reality, even when these perceptions are faulty. Expectations generate performance. So there's a couple of points there. John Haidt wrote this book, The Righteous Mind, and what he basically says in that book is that if people have a set of opinions, like political views, they will look for evidence that confirms those views and ignore evidence that contradicts those views. Okay, that's basically an example of self-validating perceptions. As well, if somebody creates a positive mindset, say in students, they will perform better than if they're given a negative mindset. Like there's that famous guy, there was a movie about this guy I saw. This high school teacher in California gave a lot of kids from underprivileged backgrounds training in calculus at the high school level. And he was able to get them to score very, very high on calculus tests. And part of the way he did it was to instill in them the belief that they could do it. A lot of what's blocking people is just the belief that they can't do what they want to do, or what's out there. They don't believe they can do it, so they don't try. And if you give people the right expectations, then you can get them to do things that they never thought was possible. Okay, now there are many biases that influence our perceptions. I've been talking about them. One is anchoring bias, that you focus on initial information. So, as I said, like when you walk into an interview, they judge you immediately, and then everything follows from that. We all have that tendency. Availability bias is that we draw a conclusion based on available information, and often that it's too limited information to really draw a good conclusion. The idea of escalation of commitment, we persist in a belief, even when there's evidence that we should try a different approach. We have hindsight bias, like we know that in 2009 there was a stock market crash, so people who bought stocks, before that were fools. But of course, it's much easier to know in hindsight than ahead. All right, so basically, managers spend 31% of their time on decision making, but over 60% of managers report that less than half of that 31% is spent in an effective way. So a lot of people spend time making decisions, but they're not satisfied with the way that they're making the decisions. Graham Allison's a famous political scientist at the Harvard School of Government, and he wrote a famous book, Essence of Decision. And he argued in there that the book's really about the Cuban Missile Crisis and that occurred during John F. Kennedy's presidency. And he says that there are basically three ways to interpret a decision. Okay, you can say that the essence is rational, that what Kennedy did reflected rational optimization. And when you watch The Fog of War, I'm talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. What McNamara says, who was there, he was at the meeting, he was at all the meetings, he was the Secretary of Defense at that time. What he says was that it was luck, it was pure luck. So it was none of the ones that Allison says, but we'll put that aside for a second. That first of all, one way to interpret what Kennedy did was as a rational actor. The second way to interpret it is in terms of bounded rationality, which is that we can't get all the information. And so we try to make a good decision based on limited information. And often that requires not optimization, but satisficing, doing what's as good as we can with the limited information that we have. And that idea was first put forward by March and Simon in their book Organizations. And the third take on it is political decision-making, that basically in any organization, there are always going to be politics, and very often the politics drive the decision. Okay, so basically you can look at organizational decision-making in these different ways, and there may not really be a clear answer as to which one is at play. Business schools traditionally like to think in terms of optimality, but the truth is that OB has rejected that approach a long time ago. OB thinks more in terms of these three processes: bounded rationality, bounded rationality, and intuitive decision making. Okay, so basically, what determines how people make decisions? First of all, personality. For example, people who have a lot of openness in the big five tend to have less self-serving bias. Second of all, intellectual ability is a factor, but it does not cure self-serving bias and overconfidence. That's one thing Jonathan Haidt found in his work on political opinions, that basically people look for information to justify their own view. And when confronted with contradictory information, will reject it and will accept information that confirms their view. And one of the remarkable things about that is that intelligence doesn't predict more impartiality. It doesn't predict better decisions. What intelligence predicts is better ability to throw out information that disagrees with you. People are not motivated to find the truth. They're motivated to confirm their preconceptions. And so basically, uh, intellectual ability is associated with cognitive ability and selecting a good decision-making strategy, but it does not cure self-serving bias. Cultural and gender differences also play a role. Females more likely to engage in social distancing while during COVID, while men are more prone to risk-taking and sensation-seeking and tend to be more risk-taking. Cultures differ in time orientation, belief, rationality, and the extent to which they're collectivist. So all of these things are going to affect decision making. Things like managerial systems constrain decision making. So organizational constraints include things like performance evaluation, reward systems, formal regulations, time constraints, and history and culture. All these things are going to, let's say, influence how people make decisions. All right, so basically, the steps to rational decision making are, first of all, define the problem, then identify decision criteria, evaluate and select the best alternative, and implement and follow up. One of the problems with this, I've already mentioned bounded rationality. It's very, very difficult to get all the information. We can't know the future. We don't know what the investment return is going to be. We don't know the risks. So basically, this rational approach to decision making only works to a degree. I'm not saying it doesn't work. So that's where you need to start getting creative. You need to start using intuition. You need to start thinking imaginatively. Most managers can do that. Most managers who are successful do that. All right, now moving into ethics. There are three takes on ethics. Utilitarianism, which is that you're making decisions based on the greatest good for the greatest number. Deontological, which is duty-based, and deonance, which is duty-based. And also the third one is legally derived rights. Okay, so basically, according to Descartes, Descartes wanted to show that the world is real, that our sense perceptions are real. And he, of course, related to that is that our ethical values are real. And what he argued is that because God exists and because God would not deceive us, that our sense perceptions are real. Okay, Hume basically demolished that argument. Hume argued that nothing is knowable because cause and effect are illusory concepts. Ethics is purely emotional, and it's not based on reason. Okay, and Kant argued that there are 12 categories of reason and 3 categorical imperatives combined with the world in itself. We don't know the world in itself, but the categories of reason and our categorical imperatives combine with the world, and the world that we perceive has objective reality because they're defined by standards of knowledge in our brain that combine with the world. But basically, we don't know the world as it really is. I think that's a fair claim, because like the world is made of atoms and stuff. You know, we don't see that. There's no way to see what it really is. What God sees. So basically, all of these things lead to in my opinion, the idea that, let me just say that Kant argued that there are three categorical imperatives. I'll elaborate on that slightly. That you treat each person as an end into themselves, that you treat every action as a universal law, and that you treat each individual capable of moral judgment as a member of a kingdom of ends, so that each person is a legislator in a kingdom of ends, or a member of a systematic union of different rational beings under common laws, so that people are ends in themselves, and that we should treat everyone as an end in themselves, anyone capable of reason. Okay, now the trouble with Kant is that there's no real foundation for saying that because we have these moral imperatives, these categorical imperatives, that they themselves are moral. So it begs the question ultimately. You can't really, just because you have these things that he says, well, these are the foundations of moral. Well, what makes them moral? Maybe nobody's moral. So it doesn't really prove that there's such a thing as morality. It just proves that we behave in certain consistent ways. So these are very complex questions, and we're not going to, you can debate them all for the rest of your life, and you're not going to come to any strong conclusion, or maybe you will, and you'll be sure. But basically, the idea, I think there's two takes on this. One is that ethics, there is a foundation for ethics, and our ethical beliefs are based on some kind of natural law. And that's basically what Kant is saying. Or you go with Hume, and there's no real reason to it. G.E. Moore, a 20th century philosopher, made the argument that claiming that ethics is based on nature is a fallacy. The naturalistic fallacy derives ethical considerations from objective facts. Clearly, this is in the Humean tradition. Such deductions are not rationally supported. So basically, people like G.E. Moore reject the idea that there's some kind of ethics in nature, which is true. Well, one thing I have to say, while I do believe that there's some loose natural law, I think what I would say is that the worst crimes in the 20th century, and probably among the worst, if not the worst, well, among the worst anyway, in human history, were committed by people who claim they had a monopoly on ethics. And this, basically Marx it's a system of mysticism that claims that there's a law of historical necessity based on a Hegelian thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and that there's this ongoing battle between the oppressed and the oppressor, which leads to new synthesis. And this is a law of history. This is just, and that there's some kind of righteous end to this history. This is mysticism. And basically, there's no real reason to think that there's a law that drives history. There's no empirical evidence of that whatsoever. It's not science. But, and I would say equally, and I'm talking about this a little bit because I just read Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism, and she talks about both Stalin and Hitler. And basically, she says that the Nazis were equally obsessed with science, just like the Marxists. And they believed that race was scientifically shown to be a determinant of the future. So both the mass murders of Stalin and the mass murders of Hitler, and of people like Pol Pot and a long line of other socialists. I just read somewhere, or heard somewhere, that as many as 7 million Venezuelans have fled Venezuela because of the policies there. And when 20 years ago, my union supported those policies and went down to give succor and support to Hugo Chavez, who instituted them. Now people are dying there from that same system that my union gave our resources to support. And the claim that socialism is science and that Nazism is science and that Marxism is science, this has been made over and over again. And it's really the naturalistic fallacy. It's not science, and you can't derive, there's no ethic in nature. Of course, I'm not saying that you can't say that there's such a thing as laws of nature that lead to a certain kind of ethic in a loose sense. In that sense, I have no problem with claiming that, for example, you can't have society unless murder is prohibited. I think that's a natural law. So to some degree, sort of the Ten Commandments, if you will, that's in a way a natural kind of law. But you can't say that, there's some specific driver of morality, and I found out what it is for the first time, and we're going to impose this on society. That's an example of the naturalistic fallacy. And that's where humanity got into so much trouble in the 20th century, imposing these ideologies on society, which end up just killing people. Yes, Patricia.
Wouldn't you call that a bit of egotism to feel that your own morality is above others? Or if
I didn't hear
just
the first
because,
part. You said, can you call what?
can you call that a sense of egotism?
Yes.
To feel
Yeah,
that it's your
very much
morality
so.
is above others?
I was just reading this book by a guy named Desmet called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And one of the points he makes, and he's updated Arendt. He based a lot of what he said on Arendt's book, but Matthias Desmet, he's what country was he from? Well, no matter. I remember what country he's from. It doesn't really matter, but it's from one of the European countries. And what he argues is that what precipitated the totalitarianism, this comes from Arendt, is a breakdown in society. So Stalin did it deliberately. Hitler was in part responding to the breakdown in German society due to hyperinflation in the 1920s, the breakdown in class society, the elimination of the Kaiser and other changes in German society, which gave people a lot of anxiety. And what Desmond argues is that people respond to this upheaval in society by trying to manage their anxiety through increasing calls for regulation and government control and increasing narcissism, and that these two patterns coexist, that people want to feel that they're in control, and part of that totalitarian ideology gives them the illusion of control. So it makes them feel special in a way, like I'm on the vanguard of change. And this in turn increases allegiance to the totalitarian ideology. Belgium, that's where he's from, Belgium. It just came back to me. Belgium, he's from Belgium. And so this is very, very interesting stuff. And basically, I think what his point is that we're seeing these patterns. And he makes the argument that the patterns repeat themselves over and over again because people react to the same changes in society in the same ways. That it's just human nature to react to certain kinds of change in the same way, and the institutions develop in parallel ways and so on. So, you can look through history and see Republican forms of government that became very tumultuous and then resulted in authoritarian rule. And the most two glaring examples the founding fathers of America were well aware of, classical Greece, Athens, and Rome. And Athens had a more basic kind of democracy, and it broke down a lot more quickly, but it devolved, and Aristotle basically argues in his Politics that democracy is just a perversion of what he calls polity. And it always represents a special interest and tends to devolve into totalitarian. He didn't have the word totalitarianism, he used tyranny. And if you look at the history of Rome, which is very, very useful to study, the Rome basically became great as a republic. It was a republic. It wasn't a full-fledged democracy, but it had a pretty good share of democracy, in some ways more democratic than we are. And they had different councils representing different segments of society, and the councils passed laws. And early in its history, the poor people who didn't have a council revolted, and they refused to work for like a long time. And they set up a camp somewhere and they moved away. They said, we're not going to live here unless we get equal rights. And so they set up something called the Proletarian Council. And you weren't allowed in it if you were an aristocrat. You had to be a proletarian. But then some of the proletarians became very wealthy and they sort of became equal to the aristocrats. And they didn't elect magistrates, but they had tribunes. And the tribunes also they had a very important role in the political system. And they could also veto legislation passed by the other council. So, well, it wasn't a full-fledged democracy. I think the people may have had more voice in that system than in this one. But in any case, after about 150 years or so, it started to break down and they started to fight with each other. There were two parties, one representing the poor called the populares, and one representing the aristocrats and people who favored the republic more called the optimates. And they fought and they started killing each other. A big turning point was when the optimati Sulla killed over 500 leading populares, but then the populares fought back and there were leaders on both sides. And ultimately, Julius Caesar was the final populari leader that took over. He became a dictator, basically. Then the people that killed him, as you know, he was assassinated, were the optimati group. They killed him. And then his adopted son became dictator. And it ended up that Rome became an empire, dictatorship. And, today we remember the Roman Empire, but actually it reached its maximum size about 100 years after the Republic fell. And they retained some of the Republican institutions, but they had very little meaning. And I think we're living through that in this time. What you see in our society is institutions are functioning in name, but really what's being done is a kind of dictatorship of government bureaucracy in the name of Republican principles. But in any case, there are a lot of parallels that you can learn about from studying Roman history. And the founding fathers were aware of it, and they tried to put safeguards in to prevent some of these, like the separation of powers and other things. But the thing is, the Romans had that too. They had all that. And I've had students say, well, we're not like Rome because Americans are more suspicious of authority. But actually, you may be surprised to learn that the Romans were more suspicious of authority than we were. Go ahead, Patricia.
I was just laughing at what you just said, because we're kind of living in the new Rome right now. Our government is running our country off of their own version of morality right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're pushing their own agendas onto the people instead of doing what the people want.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, our
Yep.
government and our government is breaking down, and I could see why some people to think that America is the new Rome and we will begin to crash very soon.
Yeah, I don't know what will be, but yeah, there's a lot of I think there's reason for concern. You know, one thing my aunt is 102, so you know, we're worried about her all the time, and she fell down recently, and I was in the city. My sister lives in Westchester, and I took her to the hospital, and so she's got a care, you know, a person who stays with her part of the day, and so that person took her, but she couldn't stay all day, so I went with her to the hospital, and I was like floored at what goes on in this hospital. I mean, they're so underfunded. They first of all, you know, they gave her a CAT scan. They were able to do that, and she was okay. And then they said to her, well, we'd like to admit you so we can go over like how to better coordinate your care, but it's going to take 2 days till they wanted her to stay in a movable bed in the lobby for 2 days to wait for a room. And I said, you're insane. You know, I mean, I'm not
I'm
gonna
so sorry. Where was this? Which hospital?
Mount Sinai West. And I said to them, you're insane. I'm not gonna, so I said, okay, well, we need to take her back home. She can't really walk, so we needed an ambulance. And they said, well, it's gonna take 6 hours to get an ambulance. So we waited for an hour, and then my wife said, wait a second, Uber has wheelchair accessible. She has her own wheelchair. So we got her that, and I got her home. But like, I mean, this thing was like a zoo. I mean, I can't, I was like horrified that this is going on in what's probably the richest city in the world, that you've got 50 people in a waiting room in beds because they don't have hospital rooms. You know,
And there's another thing also. You're lucky your wife remembered about Uber, because that ambulance ride would have cost you $6,000 just to take her back home.
really?
Yeah, it's a lot of money now. A lot of people, instead of calling the ambulance when they need one, they're calling Lyfts and Ubers to the hospital because it's
Yeah.
cheaper.
Yeah. Well, it cost me $25. But so I was lucky. But no, I'll tell you, you know, it's like things are falling apart. When I was young, if you had a medical problem, you went to the hospital. There was no way to get into a room. You know, I'm like stunned as to what's going on. You know, so, and then you look at what, you know, they're spending money on all kinds of things. I'm not going to go over it, but you know, it's really not the time or place. But what is going on? It's like the society is breaking down.
Well,
Anyway,
I'll say this. Sorry to cut you guys off, but my mom was just in Woodhall Hospital about 2 weeks ago. She had to wait maybe a day and a half for a bed. But now, come to find out, Woodhall was one of the hospitals that got caught up in the flood, and I'm hearing that they are considering turning it. So that hospital is shut down right now completely, like it's not even has no patients. But they're considering having now this hospital become a hospital for the immigrants that are that are here, to let that hospital just be for immigrants. That's what I'm hearing. But we were already at that condition. This was roughly 2 weeks ago. My mom was in there, literally waited a day and a half in the emergency room just to get a room. And then now, they got caught in a flood where their generator broke or whatever. And now they're thinking about letting this be a hospital for the immigrants. And I'm just like, this is crazy. It's a lot.
there's like a total shortage of hospitals. They must have closed a lot of hospitals already. Now they're closing more. So the waiting time in the other ones is going to get worse. That's insane. So you had the same experience. I didn't know about any of this. I mean, I haven't been to the hospital in a long time, so I don't really ever had to go. I don't think I've ever had to go to the hospital, but all right, I'll take attendance and I'll get you out of here. Okay, so this was October 1. And this is October 8th. And I promise to be better with those links. I don't know what I've been doing wrong. I keep screwing it up. I'll get it right this time, I promise. Okay, there's about 40 people here, I think. Okay, close to 40, 38. Afzal Mohammed. Nabia Ahmed. Rima Akhtar. Omar Ali.
I'm here, Professor.
Okay, sir. Have a good evening.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Chastity Aquino.
I'm here.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Nita Aslam.
Here.
Have a good night. Natali Ben Yosef.
Here.
Have a good evening. Ariana Besesser.
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
Have a good night. Alicia Brooks.
Good night, Professor.
Good night, Alicia. Anthony Castaneda.
I'm here, Professor.
You're in my afternoon class, no?
No, I'm in
that's
this
someone
class.
else. That's somebody else. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Same last name though. That's what confused me.
Oh, what
Yeah.
a coincidence.
No
Yeah.
relation to Carlos Castaneda, I assume.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Have a good night, Professor.
Jerica Cepeda. Okay. Alea Charlton. Soraya Chowdhury.
I'm here, Professor.
Have a good evening.
You too, thanks. Have a good night.
All right. Glory Christian. Crystal,
I'm here, Professor.
have a good evening.
You too.
Elizabeth. Qingyan Ding.
Yes, I'm here.
Have a good night, Qingyan.
You too. Bye.
I know. Vladimir Duval Saint.
I'm here.
Have a good night. Benvante Fogler.
I'm here.
Have a good evening. Jordan Glenn Williams. Dipu Hossein. Zinin Huang.
I'm here, Professor.
Oh, have a good evening, Zinin. Tanya Ingram. Prince Andy. Nikita. Oh no, Nikita's I think dropped.
No, I'm here, Professor.
Oh, you're here? Okay, Nikita. No, I didn't say Makita. Although I'll give you attendance. You can go. I said Nikita with an N, but no problem. I'm looking for Nikita Conan. I think that person dropped. I'm not sure. Yeah, I believe so. I seem to recall that. Yi Lin. Yi. Karen Liu. Karen Liu. Iman Malik. Joshua spoke in class.
I'm here. Have a good night, Professor.
Yes, sir. Patrice. Patrice
here.
spoke also. Good comments, Patrice. Zingran May. Zingrang also dropped, I think. Alexandra Melendez.
Here, Professor.
Have a good evening. Afra Noman.
I'm here.
Have a good evening. Okay, Deanna, Pierre Louise,
I'm here.
have a good night.
Night.
Miftal Proga,
Hello, I'm here. Have a great
Hi.
night, Professor.
thank you, you too. Kuo-Ming Kwan,
Professor, I'm here. Have a
have
good
a
night.
good night. Asif Rahman, Asif. Rafikar Rahman,
I'm here, Professor. Have a good night.
good evening. Safayat Rahman. Okay, Robert Rubino. Okay, Mohammed Sarwar. Mohammed Sarwar. Lauren Segal. Margarita Sherback.
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
Have a good evening. You too. Hafsa Siddiqui.
Yes, I'm here. Have a good night.
You too, Hafsa. Giovanni Simon. Giovanni. Chanel Sterling. Chanel? Okay, have a good night. Sanzita Tanya. Okay, missed a couple of messages. Okay, Yilin said they were here. I'm just checking the messages. Okay, all right. Omar Lee and Yilin, I'll just check that. I had Omar. Yilin, I didn't have. Okay. Janiton Sur Awardi.
Here.
Janiton, have a good evening, Janiton. Sanzita Tanya. Sanzita. Okay, is Israel Telpa.
I'm here, Professor. Have a good night.
Good night, Israel. Abigail Tuachi.
Here.
Have a good evening, Abigail.
You too.
Thank you. Ghazi Udin.
I'm here, Professor.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Ashley Vasquez.
I'm here.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you. Yoland.
Yeah, Professor.
Good
Professor,
night.
may I have a word with you, please, after you're done?
Want to talk? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
No
thanks.
problem.
Okay.
Joyce Woozy.
Yeah, hi, Professor.
Have a good evening, Joyce.
You too. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Haorong Jian.
Yes, I'm here, Professor.
Have a good night. Thank you. Xiao Hua Yan.
I'm your professor.
Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you. And Charles Ron, you said something.
here.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so who did I miss? Did I miss people? Anyone I didn't call? Let me see. I had one.
Professor, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Could you help me to check my participate grade for September 10th, please?
Can I check your attendance for that day?
I'm not sure because I do attend the Zoom session, the Zoom class on that date. Could you help me to check, please?
Yeah, okay, I've got you present.
Oh, yes, but on blackboard, it still didn't have the grade. So could you help me to check it?
Okay, I will check it.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a good night.
You're welcome. Have a good night. Anyone else have a question? Okay, go ahead. Yolande, you want to talk about something?
Yes, please. Just, would you be able to change my preferred email to the Brooklyn College email instead of the BC Web Central? I went on there
You
to
couldn't, you can't
change it.
do that?
Um,
You couldn't do it?
no, it's not letting me.
Could you please call IT? I have no clue as to how to do that.
Yeah. They
Please
said that
call,
you're not, they say you can't, it can't be changed.
why?
There's a note there that says it cannot be changed.
Why can't it be changed?
I don't know, because you had initially my Brooklyn College email. And when they put this again,
No.
this thing in place where you have to send it to the BC mail,
All right.
then that squashed.
This is crazy.
And
So
yes, and I am always, every day I'm on my
that's not fair.
on my Brooklyn
I
College.
can't run a program like this. You can't take an online class without the wrong email address.
Yeah.
Let me just check this.
And every time we have an issue, especially with the Zoom session, I can't even get the email because it goes to my BC mail.
I'm really sorry. I don't know what to
That's
tell you. Hold on. Let me see if I can add you in some way.
Yeah.
Um, if I can, I'll call them and ask them about it.
Okay. This is so.
Hold on.
Mhm.
Let me see. So, all right, yeah, I see you have BC mail. So let me ask you a question. When you try to change it you get on Web Central,
It's
right?
telling me that it cannot be changed. It has to stay that way.
Why?
I don't know why.
Do you work for CUNY?
Yes,
Do you work at
Brooklyn College.
BMCC? Oh, you work at Brooklyn College?
Mhm.
But do you have an account with?
Yeah, it used to be ywildman@brooklyn.cuny.edu. I took the other classes with you, and that was what it was. But this semester they changed it over to BC Mail, and it's so annoying because I don't get
Can't
on
you
there
just
very
change it
often.
to your like personal account? Supposedly they let anyone change it. That I've always been told that. You
Oh,
can change it just to a personal email.
yeah. Well, I don't even want it to come to my personal email. If it comes to, the Brooklyn College email, it's fine with me because I'm on there every day.
Oh, I don't know. Do you have like another email account you could use?
Then that would be my personal email.
You use the Brooklyn College one as your personal email.
No, not really. I thought that they wanted to make sure that we use something with CUNY in it so that,
No, you can use like if you have one at home that you email your friends on,
yeah.
use that one.
Oh, would you be able to put it in? Because I have that in there somewhere and it's not, nothing is coming
Where it
to me.
says log on to your Web Central.
Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah, do it right now.
Okay, let me put it on there. And to change your web page for Brooklyn College, so you had to find yourself all over the place.
Have you logged on?
Not yet, I have to go in,
That's right.
yeah. I'm not getting in there yet. So it's my BC student email.
Does it let you change that?
No. If you don't want to use your BC account, you can either change your preferred email address. But when you're going to my personal info, it's telling you the BC email accounts are hosted on Microsoft Office 365 platform. This email address cannot be customized. It's not giving you an option to change.
But can you change it to your personal email?
Not even. No thing that to change.
I thought there was a way.
There was a way prior, because I
Did you
was able to
change
change
that?
it and put into the Brooklyn College email. But since I put this on now, I cannot do it.
Okay. All right. I'll tell you what I'll do. Send me an email and I'll use that email. I'll add it to when I send emails.
Okay, so I could use the Brooklyn College one, right?
Send me whichever email you want to use and
Okay.
send me an email from that account and
Mm-hmm.
I'll send it separately to you.
Okay,
I don't
thank you.
understand. There's no way that it says like change my email or my email address and it says change or something.
No,
There's no way to change it.
no. It says this email address cannot be customized. BC student email accounts are hosted on Microsoft Office 365 platform.
Well, the oh, I thought of something. If you get on your BC mail, is there a way to forward the mail to the other account?
I was thinking about that too. I might probably have to do that in the office because I have it set up
Let's see.
on mine.
Yeah, I'm looking at, I have Outlook. Is yours on Outlook?
No,
Outlook web app? Is that what you have or you have a different one?
what I have is Web Central. I don't have the Outlook one. I am not so IT savvy.
Hold on. Well, I'll look at mine to see if there's a way.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Prior, you were able to change this because that's when I had, and when you initially started the class, I used to get it on my Brooklyn College email, not the Web Central,
And they just changed it.
and they changed it.
And there's no way for you to
To put in another email.
do it or anything
No.
like that.
So now I have to wait for the other kids when they get the email, like tonight again. I had to wait for them to share the Zoom information to be able to get on.
Okay, so I think there's probably a way. There's some kind of settings somewhere. And you might be able to tell it to forward the email. But I am not seeing it on mine. I'm sure it's here somewhere. I'm not really sure where.
I could probably ask when I go back to the office because we do have
Yeah, maybe
students.
someone at IT, they don't give you any explanation as to why they
No,
changed your email address or why you can't. You used to be able to put your own email address, like a lot of the students don't use the college email, like if I look at the people in the class, and this,
Mhm.
um,
I don't know how to do it.
oh no, they're all BC Mail now.
Yeah, they changed it.
They changed something.
Yeah,
Bunch of idiots.
yeah, they
Can't
changed.
believe it. They just changed the emails
Yeah,
without
changed
telling people.
everybody.
Holy Toledo. No wonder
Yeah.
why it's
As
chaos.
I tell you, when we first started the semester, everything was fine. It was coming to my BC mail, my Brooklyn College mail. My not web mail, not Web Central. Brooklyn College mail. Then the VP sent out a notice to say that we should be checking our things because that's our BC mail, our Web Central mail, because that's what is being used.
Everybody's using BC Mail now.
Yeah. Oh, this is annoying.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
They changed it, like, but it's like, why would they do that? Like, what motive would they possibly have to do
I
that?
have no idea. None whatsoever.
Like technology is supposed to improve. This is like much worse thing.
It's gotten worse. It's
Yeah.
gotten so bad. I think
Well,
it's,
I'm retiring. This is my last semester, so
I know, I am so sad to see you go, but
yeah,
I know
oh
you
well,
tried.
but I
You
think
have,
I'm getting out at the right time.
you have been standing up for the students for so long
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's nice of you to
Mhm.
say.
that I hate to
I just don't know what to say about this. I wouldn't even know who to complain to or what to say.
Yeah, you don't know because each one's sending you to the next one. And now you have to go online and send an email to so-and-so person and this person. There is no person to person talk anymore.
How can you run a school?
I don't know.
You just
I
change
don't-
all the students' emails and you don't tell anyone?
Yep,
Kidding me?
yep. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I will ask the students if there's a way to, to forward it.
All right.
But would it help? Would you be able to send it to me if I send you my Brooklyn College email?
Yeah, I'll send it to you separately. I don't know what to do at this
I
point.
don't know.
I
That's
used to,
why.
I used to try to send it through Blackboard,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all wrong on Blackboard, and I would spend literally 10 days of time changing the email addresses. I was spending like 2 weeks changing email addresses. I was like, it's ridiculous.
I'm
I
telling
finally
you.
gave up and I started using the Web Central.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for maybe 12, 10, I don't know how long, 10 years, maybe more,
Mm-hmm.
longer than that. And then now that's messed up.
It is because most of the students would tell you that they don't even go on that Web Central mail. They don't. And I don't even have it set up on my computer at home. I just recently asked somebody to download the Microsoft Office 365 so I can at least check it. And that's where I saw my mail. Actually saw my mail was coming there. And I tried to see if I can, change it. I couldn't. I went back to Web Central to see if I can change it. And it doesn't give you that option anymore. Doesn't.
Yeah, I don't even know. I don't want to say anything. We're recording, so.
Okay, that's right.